Hi, and welcome back to Melting Spots, a podcast from the California Migration Museum. At the museum, we tell stories about migration that ask questions about who we are and make us think about who we might want to be. I'm Gabby Santis, Director of Research, and I'm here with my co-host and museum executive director, Katie Long.
Hi. So, now you know about the museum, but maybe you're wondering, what exactly is this Melting Spots? Well, it's a project about food. But, spoiler alert, it's also about immigration. It's about the way we eat now. In a globalized world and in multicultural cities, it's about the way that food can define our sense of belonging.
In the spring of 2024, we interviewed chefs and restaurant owners all over San Francisco, trying to understand how immigrants shaped the city's food culture, from that first gold rush to the tech wave. The result was a collection of stories brought together on a map that lets you eat your way across San Francisco's rich immigrant history.
If you want to start your own exploration, you can find the map at www.calmigration.org/melting spots. But in this podcast series, we're following some of our favorite journeys across that map, tracing some of the ways in which these stories touch on ideas that are actually universal, relevant to conversations about immigration that are happening everywhere.
So this is episode 2. You can jump right in, or if you missed episode 1, where we talk about beginnings in San Francisco's immigrant food scene, you can and should go back and have a listen. Mm-hmm. In this episode, we're going to talk about the ways that family has a central role in immigrant food and immigrant food businesses.
Family is so central to migration in general. So often, migration is about many more people than just the migrants who leave. Mm-hmm. It's about those who get left at home. Maybe they're waiting on remittances. Maybe they're waiting on a visa. Maybe they're just trying to save money for a bus ticket. It's also about those you bring with you. And it's about those who are born after you arrive, who never physically move anywhere. It's the kind of project that unfolds over many generations.
Yes, and often first-generation immigrants sacrifice a lot, taking jobs they're overqualified for, dealing with discrimination, struggling with language, so that their kids can shine. Although, as many second-gen immigrants can tell you, just ask Kamala Harris, that burden isn't always an easy one to carry.
So let's start with the obvious here. When you're an immigrant, you miss the family you left behind. And there is often separation. Parents leave children behind with grandparents or aunts or uncles. One partner might go ahead to establish a foothold before bringing the rest of the family over, which could take months, years. Because however you arrive, immigration is expensive.
And all this is part of why it's common too for small businesses, like a corner store, to be an economic anchor for an immigrant family. Something to build up a nest egg, but also offer a job when new family members make it across.
And our first story today is about one of the most well-known corner stores in San Francisco, a store that gave the McGanum family, arriving from Palestine, their foothold in America.
So, for many of us locals, Bi-Rite is synonymous with San Francisco and the whole California food movement. It's an independent grocery chain with farm-direct produce, artisanal cheeses, baked goods, prepared foods with just really high-quality ingredients. A foodie's dream, basically.
The price tags might just wake you up once you reach the till. Mm-hmm. But no, you're right. Bi-Rite is a city institution. It's located in the heart of the Mission District, just a few blocks from Dolores Park, which is another famous city landmark.
What fewer people know is that when Sam McGanum's family bought Bi-Rite in 1964, it was just an average corner store in a working-class neighborhood.
Hello, how are you? Would you like a bag today? Great.
My name is Sam McGanum, and I'm the founder of the Bi-Rite family of businesses in San Francisco. Bi-Rite is a local, independently owned neighborhood market. Our purpose is to create community through food. Each of our stores has a kitchen in them, and we make food using local seasonal ingredients. We also work with a lot of small independent farmers and food makers for us, really, it's all about building relationships with people who share our passion and commitment to creating community through food.
That sounds like the world I live in.
It works.
My father and uncle, who were the original owners of Bi-Rite, came from Palestine and immigrated to San Francisco in the early 60s. Came here and had to start from nothing and decided to do what lots of other immigrants do, work for their family. And they spent a couple of years working for their cousin who had a grocery store in the Tenderloin district. And then after saving up enough money, they bought their own business, the original market over on 18th Street. And it's been in our family since 1964. Bi-Rite was very different. I mean, like I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s. We sold cigarettes and cheap liquor and Hostess cupcakes and Doritos. It was a bodega. Many of my relatives, as they immigrated from Palestine to the United States and to San Francisco more specifically, got their start at Bi-Rite, much like my father and uncle got their start at their cousin's store. Corner stores are an accessible and easy way for immigrants to get established. And I don't want to oversimplify the work, but, in a lot of ways it was accessible. It was, bought product and put it on the shelf. And as long as you kind of stood at the counter and treated people with respect and smiled, people would come in and buy that product. And it became a business. Palestinians are renowned for their hospitality, and I learned, from my father and uncle how important it is to make people feel welcome and to make them feel safe and to make them feel appreciated. At the end of the day, you've got to create a hospitable environment, and it was easy for newly arrived people to be able to do that.
So, decades later, Sam, who you just heard from there, was responsible for Bi-Rite's transformation into a mecca for fresh, local produce. And today, Bi-Rite is pretty unique as far as groceries go. But Sam's father and uncle's story about how they got started here is not unusual. Across San Francisco, corner stores are the linchpin of many immigrant, especially Arab immigrant, families' journeys.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to also think about how Bi-Rite is still very much a family business. And that's something we heard again and again across so many of the interviews we did for Melting Spots, right? Stories about how parents had passed on their businesses to sons and daughters, about how families were still working together, about how the restaurant was the family's legacy.
It always strikes me as interesting how that happens, how often the migrants who travel far away from family are then really intent on keeping the family they create here very close to them, digging down those roots. That's something I definitely felt when talking to Vera Chan Waller. Let's hear from her now.
She wants a white noodle roll with the veggie one, the mushroom.
Steamed dumbo with the shrimp.
My name is Vera Chan Waller, and I am third generation of Yank Sing restaurant. So my grandparents started it back in 1958. Yank Sing is a dim sum restaurant. We have other dishes as well, but we're very well known for our dim sum. People compare it to tapas, Spanish tapas. They're small bites. And the word dim sum literally means to touch the heart. It actually originated back, we believe, in the Song Dynasty, which dates back to like the 900 to the 1270s. The imperial chefs there would create delicacies called dim sum. My grandparents were from China, from Guangxi, and they were, like many of the immigrants that came to the United States, sort of forced to leave China back in the early 1940s during the Communist Revolution. It was rough at first because there's only so much they could do without the language, knowing English and whatnot. So my grandmother actually worked at several dim sum restaurants in Chinatown and sort of developed that skill. And then later on saved up money to be able to open up the first Yank Sing, which was located in Chinatown on Broadway Avenue. And then my parents, when they took it over, they decided to sort of broaden the palate by bringing it outside of Chinatown and into the financial district. The reason why my father decided to bring Yank Sing outside of Chinatown was because he felt the restaurants were sort of competing in price, and they were always competing who could bring it down to a lower price, which then, of course, affects ingredients as well. And so his mission was really to elevate the perception of Chinese cuisine. He wanted people to realize that dim sum had a place in the world, Chinese food had a place in the world, and it's not meant to be cheap. It comes from a very grand history. When they first opened, no one believed that it would succeed. They would only do COD, cash on delivery. They wouldn't invoice him. They would have to collect on the spot because they didn't think that Yank Sing would succeed in the financial district. But fortunately, it did.
Vera was really thoughtful when we were talking to her. She wanted to make sure that in talking about how Yank Sing left Chinatown, she didn't want to sound like she was looking down on the neighborhood today. Because since the beginning of Chinatown, all the way back to the Gold Rush era, it's been the first stop for newly arrived Chinese immigrants. Even today, the neighborhood is incredibly densely populated and home to powerful family associations and community orgs that all provide things like legal counseling, adult English classes. It's also still one of the most affordable places to rent in the whole city, so it's a lifeline for many.
You know, if you want to know more about the history of San Francisco's Chinatown, well, we've got a great recommendation. California Migration Museum's very own audio tour of Chinatown, which looks at how the neighborhood faced down natural disaster and discrimination to survive into the 21st century, becoming the place Vera knows today.
And it's free. So if you're in San Francisco, you can walk the tour in the neighborhood. Or you can take a 360 video and watch it from home. So just hop over to our website and download. It's a deep dive into the 1906 earthquake, and I think it really brings old Chinatown to life.
Meanwhile, back in 2024, I think Yank Sing's story is so interesting because it reflects this, what's often a common trope among immigrant families, this idea that success is synonymous with getting out of the neighborhood you started in. Conventional wisdom says that leaving the immigrant enclave is the symbol of economic well-being, right? It's the inclusion in broader culture. It's the way you get a step closer to realizing that so-called American dream. It's the idea that success means leaving.
And that's why I think this next story is a really interesting contrast to that idea of getting out of Chinatown. Chelsea Hung ticked every success box that children of immigrants are supposed to check. After college, she had moved away from San Francisco and her family's restaurant to a tech job in New York. But a devotion to her family and a desire to honor tradition were powerful enough to lure her back to the neighborhood.
I am Chelsea Hung. I'm one of the owners of R&G Lounge, located in San Francisco, Chinatown. We're a pretty well-known, iconic, I would say, Cantonese cuisine banquet restaurant. I think because we've been around for 40 years, many people have celebrated generations of milestones here, including myself. I've celebrated numerous birthdays here. I've even had my wedding here. A Chinese banquet is usually family style. It's usually sit at a round table and everyone can see everyone at the table and have a conversation. And then usually there's a lazy Susan. In the middle of the table, various dishes are served. And for a Chinese banquet, there's usually about 10 courses, starting with appetizers or cold plates and then soup. And then we move on to your meat and seafood dishes and usually end with a carb, such as a fried rice or noodle, and then always ending with desserts. A lot of Chinese banquets, like the dishes have auspicious meanings. For example, like during Chinese New Year, we sell a lot of our abalone dish, and because the Chinese name for abalone is Baoyu, and it kind of sounds similar to the saying Ba Lao Man Yao, which also means wishing you well in everything. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I spent majority of my life in Chinatown. My dad actually was one of the founders of R&G Lounge. Growing up, I didn't really think that I was going to be in the restaurant industry. I went into tech. I actually moved to New York. Basically, my mom wanted to retire, and I pretty much just packed my bags, quit my job, and came back to take it over. I felt that I can always find a 9-to-5 job, but I may not always have this opportunity to continue my family's legacy. Banquet halls play a really important part in our community, especially for Chinatown. It's a place for people to gather, to have a good meal, for people to celebrate. And unfortunately, they're actually declining a lot. There used to be maybe at least 8 banquet halls in Chinatown. Now there's maybe like 3. I do believe that it is up to the next generation to continue the charm and grace of Chinatown.
You know, I love that ending, the charm and grace of Chinatown. You can just tell, right, how proud she is to be continuing her family's legacy in the neighborhood. And I think, again, you see this paradox between the first generation immigrants who came from so far away, and especially in previous generations, sometimes never seeing the family and friends they left behind again. And then later, the importance of the families they built here.
It's also clear how much it means to Chelsea to be preserving Chinatown's banquet culture, which, like she says, is really hanging on by a thread right now after the pandemic. It's something that, throughout her life, connected her to Chinese culture even as the second generation.
You know, I think for many immigrant families, preserving some of the rituals around serving and eating food, celebrating special occasions and holidays, can really help to unify a family that's made up of parents and children who grew up in wildly different contexts. Food's something you can still have in common, even when your way of dressing, your taste in music, even the language you dream in are different. Okay, I arrived from the UK a decade ago, and even though my kids, American-born, say tomato, they still eat paneer tikka masala, just like proper Brits. You know, that's even more true for immigrant communities who can't just visit family back home easily. And that's certainly the case for most Iranian Americans. So when we visited Lavash in SF's Sunset District, which is just a few blocks from Golden Gate Park, it was very clear how it had helped a second generation of Persian Americans connect with their immigrant roots.
Even though the route to that Persian food restaurant involved kind of a lot of burritos.
My name is Saeed Talai, and I'm the owner of Lavash. Lavash is the name of the bread. It's a flat bread which is used in the whole Middle East. And we chose that name because it really fits our menu and the way that we present our food. My first food business was interesting. I opened up a Mexican taqueria back in 1981. I hired a chef, a Mexican chef, and we both together worked in that Mexican taqueria. It was really successful for 20 years or so. We used to, have lines about half a block. Back then, Mexican food was becoming very popular, and there were not that many Mexican restaurants or taquerias throughout the city. So it made quite a bit of sense as far as the business and as far as, everybody loves Mexican food. Mexican restaurants started to get saturated in the whole city. Every block started opening up a taqueria and Mexican food. So we decided, in order to stay in the competition, to downsize the Mexican restaurant and open up a small Persian restaurant.
My name is Keon. I'm the son of Saeed and Nazila, and Dad would always be cooking for us at home, and he figured out a way to bring that to the restaurant side, and everybody that comes in here is like our family. We really enjoyed doing that, and we were like, this is what we want to do.
You want it like the salad or just white salad? Oh yeah, salad would be great.
Everything we serve, there is available in Iran right now. But sometimes, it's better quality here than even in Iran is, because California is a center of agriculture and, a a lot of good stuff that is being grown these days.
So, I mean, I talk about this with my parents all the time, but, growing up as a Iranian-American, I kind of don't really know my identity as well, whether I'm more Iranian or more American, but the food that we grew up with and the food that we cook and we provide for our community and our clients, it really helps me get in touch with my culture and my family, and being able to see my mom and dad, just like how they cook and what ingredients they use and how they put everything together, just makes me feel more connected with my family and the love and everything that they provide for us.
Of course, you don't necessarily need to start a restaurant, right, to connect to your culture. For most immigrants, those traditions are preserved at home. I mean, Exhibit A is the jar of Marmite in my own cupboard.
And that's kind of how the next restaurant we're going to talk about, Estrellita's Snacks, came to be. What started out as a motherly gesture to satisfy her daughter's pregnancy cravings turned into a profitable business selling street food from El Salvador. Food that was all cooked from the comfort and the restraints of a home kitchen.
Now, this story is in Spanish, and we're going to play it in Spanish. And part of the reason for doing this is because it's actually kind of crazy to talk about food in San Francisco only in English.
Totally.
I mean, so much of the food we eat in this city is cooked by Spanish speakers. Estrella speaks slowly, very clearly. So even if you know just a little Spanish, I'd encourage you to listen to the next 2 minutes of audio. But you can also skip ahead 2 minutes if you'd prefer. Okay, here's Estrella González.
Mi nombre es Estrella González y soy la dueña de Estrellitas Snacks. Es comida salvadoreña. Bueno, a mi mamá inmigró en el tiempo de la guerrilla en El Salvador, inmigró para México, estuvo muchos años viviendo ahí y después inmigró a San Francisco. Fue en el año 1997 que ella llegó a San Francisco y ella siempre ha sido una persona que le ha gustado trabajar independientemente. Y yo ya llegué a la edad de 23 años. Yo estaba en ese entonces, estaba yo esperando bebé y a mí se me antojó un producto de El Salvador y que aquí no lo encontrábamos. Entonces ella dijo, voy a ir a la tienda a comprar los plátanos y la yuca y lo voy a preparar yo para ti. Le dije, ok, entonces ella fue y solo gastó $20, pero le rindió mucho lo que ella compró. Entonces ella dijo, como me sobró esto, voy a salir a la misión a venderlo. Y lo empacó en bolsitas de Ziploc y se fue a venderlo. De esos $20 se le hicieron como $300 en ganancia. Entonces desde ahí ella dijo, ahora yo sé lo que voy a hacer. Esto va a ser mi negocio y aquí tengo que seguir. Y así fue como inició Estrellitas Snack. Cuando ella empezó a cocinar como las pupusas, los tamales, los guisados, entonces yo estaba involucrada con ella, mirando todo, cómo hacía, qué es lo que ponía aquí, ponía. Entonces hasta hoy día nosotros continuamos con la misma receta que ella nos ha dejado, seguimos con esa misma receta y no le cambiamos nada. Una pupusa es la comida tradicional de El Salvador, que lo puedes comer en cualquier momento, puede ser en desayuno, en lunch, en cena, a cualquier hora lo puedes comer. Es una tortilla de maíz y va rellena con comida adentro. Tú puedes escoger el relleno que tú quieras, lo cierras y después lo haces como una tortilla y lo pones al comal para cocinarlo. Y va acompañado con curtido, le llamamos curtido, pero es en realidad ensalada de col, de repollo, con zanahoria y vinagre y lleva salsa de tomate. Y así es una pupusa salvadoreña. Mi mamá ahora día está un poquito mal de salud, entonces ya no puede trabajar, pero nos dejó este legado que continuáramos con lo que ella había hecho. Y pues la que más me gusta cocinar es a mí. Mis hermanos dijeron, no, yo no quiero, pero tú si quieres, sigue adelante tú. Y aquí estamos, siguiendo adelante.
Okay, so here's the quick English version. Estrella's from El Salvador. And when she was pregnant, she started craving a Salvadoran snack that you can't find in San Francisco. So her mom, I still can't say that word in American, decided she'd buy the ingredients and make it for her. But she made so much, she had a ton left over. She decided to sell it on the street, and that's how the business began. Today, they're known for their delicious pupusas. They're a kind of famous Salvadoran stuffed cornbread. Sadly, her mum isn't in the best of health, so now is Estrellita's business.
I think that's a great story to end this episode. Not only does Estrella touch on food as something that unites and connects families through heritage, but it's also a story about that intergenerational pursuit of an American dream, which family is at the center of.
Oh, like they say, family's all we've got.
Although, of course, it's not really all we have, is it?
No, there is a lot more going on.
Especially for immigrants, beyond your immediate family, the extended networks of migrant communities are also so vital to everything we just talked about, connecting to your heritage, providing support, keeping traditions alive across generations. So that's why in our next episode, we'll be talking about the immigrant food stories that best represent some of San Francisco's neighborhoods and the communities that have grown up around these businesses.
We'll see you here next time. But for now, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Melting Spots. Please subscribe to listen to all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like them, leave us a review and tell your friends.
And don't forget to check out the Melting Spots map itself at www.calmigration.org/meltingspots and sign up for our newsletter for updates on our latest projects. I'm Gabby Santis with Katie Long. This podcast was produced by Kathy Edwards and recorded by Grace Coleman. We'll see you soon.